Hello, everyone. My name is Rose Simpson. I'm a librarian at the New Haven Free Public Library. All right, so today we will be using a program called Inkstitch, which is a free program you can use to make embroidery files. There's many different files of it or programs available for this. We're picking one that you can use for free. You could download it at home if you wanted and put it on your own computer, or we have it on the computers at the library. You can use it here. Inkscape is a program for vector graphics. That's as opposed to like a program like Photoshop, which paints raster graphics. And I will show you the difference between those later. So nice thing about Inkscape is it's free. You can download it and install it freely on any computer. And then Inkstitch is what's called an extension to it. It's like an add-on that will change your vector graphics into embroidery files. And nice thing about both of these, since they're free programs, they've got tutorials on how to use them. This is inkstitch.org. It's got the user manual tutorials right here. And then over in Inkscape, it's got like learn all these tutorials here. They're very thorough, so they're very good for like teaching you how to use it. There is a lot of features, which is why I'm going to be going over the basics today to show you how to use this. All right, so now this is where you can find it if you're ever looking for it. So I'm going to hop over to Inkscape itself so I can demonstrate, as I said, the difference between vector and raster graphics. So raster is made up of, the picture is made up of lots of little tiny dots put together. It's like if you're looking at a picture in a newspaper and you zoom really close, you can see all the little dots of ink. That's what we see here. So if we like zoomed in on this, which I may be able to zoom in here, you can see it's made up of a whole bunch of little dots, as opposed to vector graphics. It's made up of like points that it's designated and then connected with lines. And then when you resize a raster graphic, it stays all blurry because just those dots get bigger. When you resize a vector graphic, it stays nice and crisp because it recognizes the relationships between these points, not the dots themselves. So that's what a vector graphic is. And Inkscape will make vector graphics. So that's like a program like Adobe Illustrator will make vector graphics, as opposed to a program like Adobe Photoshop or MS Paint, which will make raster graphics. Now that we know what a vector graphic is, we need to figure out how to turn it into an embroidery file. So the difference between a embroidery file and a vector file is that the embroidery file will actually mark down each individual stitch. The embroidery machine needs to know that, because if you just put any old picture in there, it doesn't know where to actually like make the stitches. So we have to convert that into an embroidery file with all these stitches. And you can see this is an example, all the little stitches here. It's a little harder to see them here, but this is an example of, and when I stitch this, it turned into this, and you can see all the little stitches there. So if you have a raster image that you want to turn into a vector, Inkscape has a nice way to do that. And that is useful if, for example, you have a logo for your business that you want to turn into an embroidery file so you can embroider it on shirts. So to turn a raster image into a vector image, we're going to click on the raster image here, then go on Path, Trace Bitmap, and then it pops up this here. And there's a bunch of little things you can adjust, like the threshold, which changes whether it recognizes a gray as a black or a white. And you can adjust those until you get it the way you want. And then click Apply. Now it made a copy of that image that's a vector image. So now I can take this and turn it into an embroidery file and just embroider this onto whatever I want. So now we know what a vector is. We know how to turn a raster into a vector. Now we need to know how to turn vector files into embroidery files. So basics, I'm going to go with the very, very basics to start with and then explain them more later. So the basics are, we're going to open up Inkscape, make a new file, and we're going to make any kind of shape. So I'm just going to draw a star here. You want to make sure that it has a fill. So the fill is, we've got a shape with a color in it. You can also do stroke, which is the lines on the outside of it. I'm going to turn off the fill so you can see what the stroke is. So this line is the stroke. Now let's put the fill back on. I'm going to turn the stroke back off. So now I have a shape with a fill. Inkstitch files work a little bit better if you turn this shape into a path. So I'm going to go path, object to path. This is optional, it just makes it work a little bit better. And then we're going to go extensions, Inkstitch, params, that's parameters. So this is going to actually turn that shape into a bunch of little stitches. And we're just waiting for that to load, and it'll give you a preview of exactly what it's going to look like. So there it's going through a fast-forwarded view of what it's going to be as it's stitching that all together. So those are the stitches it's going to make. And there's a bunch of different settings there you can change. Like if you want to change the spaces between the rows, you can do that. Anytime you change this, it'll change that. And you might want to change the spaces between the rows if, depending on the fabric you're using, if it comes out too tight, you can space it out a little. And it's got, the stitches you can see are going in two directions. These ones, they're called the underlay. That helps like keep the fabric from getting bent out of shape or like puckered or wrinkled as it's going. And you can change the spacing between that too if you want. You could turn it off if you wanted, but you probably want to leave it on because it makes the files come out neater. And then once you've got everything the way you want, you click on Apply and Quit. Then after that, we'll go File, Save As, and then you save it wherever you want to save it. So I'm going to give it, call this star. An SVG file is just a vector file. You probably want to save a copy of that as an SVG. So I'll save that, because once you save it as the embroidery file, it's harder to change it if you want to like make any adjustments. So I've got this as an SVG now. I'm going to go File, Save As again, and then change it, save it as the type of embroidery file we need. So there's a bunch of different brands of embroidery machines. Each one will use a different file type. So now I'm going to save that. Okay, so now it's saved. So now I've got a copy of this as an SVG file if I want to make adjustments later, and I've got it as a PES file so that I can actually embroider it. That is the very, very basics of how to use Inkstitch. So make a shape, params, save it. Now let's get a little more complicated. So let's start with the basic setup. We've got a bunch of different colors here. Inkscape, as we see here, can do many, many, many colors. But when you're actually embroidering something, you're limited to what colors of thread you've got. So we can set up palettes so that we have it set up to only the colors that we can actually have thread for. To do that, you're going to go down here in the bottom right corner and click on these three lines. That'll pull up a menu of a bunch of different thread palettes. When you install Inkstitch on your computer, it'll bring in all these palettes for different brands of thread. So I've got the Brother Embroidery selected because that's the brand of machine we have and the brand of thread we have. If you have a different brand, you can just pick a different one. So I'm going to go back to Brother Embroidery. And then if I wanted to change this shape to one of the colors of thread I have here, I could hover over it, right click, set fill. So now it'll make the star in green. And what's useful about setting these is that you can like get a preview of what it'll look like in the colors you actually have. And then when you import it into the embroidery machine, it'll tell you exactly which color to use. Like the spools of thread have numbers on them. So black might be 300, yellow might be, oh, there it is, it's 202. And it'll have those numbers printed on the spools, so you'll know which one to put in the machine when it asks you for this color. All right, so now let's delete that and go into a little more detail about making a vector image. So if I've got a shape here, if we've got a solid fill, you're going to do a fill stitch, which is what we did in params when it had a bunch of different stitches to fill that shape in. If we do instead, let's turn on a stroke and turn off the fill. So now I've got a shape with a solid line. a solid line will do, it's a zigzag stitch. And that's, if we go over here, that's this zigzag stitch. So it makes an actual zigzag. And the thickness of the zigzag matches the thickness of the stroke here. So if I go over to stroke style, if I make this 3 millimeters wide, so now that's going to be zigzags 3 millimeters thick. So I'll go to Inkstitch params so we can see what that looks like. There it goes. Now you'll see it doesn't do corners, it's just straight lines. So it's not great for anything other than a straight line. But I'll show you how to change it into a satin stitch later, which will do those corners a whole lot better. So I'm going to cancel this for now. Now, if you want just to do a stitch, just to sew a straight line, as if you're sewing on a regular sewing machine, you're going to want to turn this stroke from a straight line into a dashed line. It doesn't matter what the thickness of the line is, what the shape style of the dashes are. But if we go Inkstitch params, we'll show that it's going to do a straight line. That's a running stitch. There it goes. Just a straight line like that. So I'm going to cancel that. All right, now if I wanted to, let's turn this back into a solid line. Let's make this a little thicker. Now a satin stitch. If we want to make this into a satin stitch, so it'll get those corners nice, the way to do that is to go back to extensions, Inkstitch, tools, satin, convert line to satin. And there, this, where it's got like 2 parallel lines with little rails on it, that means it's going to be a satin stitch. Like in this. This is a satin stitch, which turned into this file. So I'm going to go here and I'll select both. I'm selecting both of those to make sure that I can see a preview of both of them, because it turns it into 2 separate pieces. Do that. There we go. So selecting both of those, I'll go extensions, Inkstitch params, so I can see what that looks like. You can see it's calling that a satin column. And now we can see, since it had it in 2 pieces, this is the first piece, this is the second piece, this corner came out great. It changed the angle of the stitches, so it comes out nice and crisp. This, it did not, because these were 2 separate pieces, so those are still going to come out wonky. So we would have to figure out how to adjust this to make it come out neat if we wanted that to have nice sharp corners. But I'll just cancel that for now. Okay, so those are the different ways you can make. We've got fill stitch, we've got the making a zigzag stitch, a running stitch, and a satin stitch. Now you can also put in letters. So if we go to Inkstitch or extensions, Inkstitch, lettering, they've got a whole bunch of different styles of letters that you can embroider. So let's pick, say I like this font, and we'll have it say testing. Let's see what that looks like. There we go. And I can go to params and see what that looks like when it's stitched out. And you'll notice these are made up of a bunch of different satin columns, so they come out neat. And many different options in here. Some of them may use more than one color. There you go. So that's how that would change. It would do, you would have to change colors a couple different times as it starts with one color, then another color, then the other color. All right, so we know how to make files. Now we know how to make them, we need to know how to make them good. So the thing about stitching is it doesn't like line up. It doesn't always line up neatly, just like shapes on a screen. The stitches will actually pull the fabric. Well, adjusting for that is called push-pull compensation, because the stitches going back and forth like that will pull the stitches inward, or if it's going up and down like that, it will push the stitches outward. So that's why how you get things like this. That had a shape with a satin stitch on the outside, but it was like very close together, so that the stitch, the fabric, the stitches pulling the fabric left little gaps like that. So I had to compensate for that and made something like this that basically made these stitches overlapping each other so that they wouldn't have any gaps. So this one came out much more neatly than that one because I learned how to adjust it. So I'm going to show you how you can do that. So here we go. So I'm going to actually hide the satin stitch so I can show you something a little better. And the nice thing, it's over here where you've got the different layers, the different elements of the design. You can just click on the eye there to make it invisible. All right, so here we have something where it had the two different colors right up against each other, like with no overlap. And you've got a little bit of a gap over on the sides here. Just on the sides here, not the sides this way, because of the push-pull effect. So the way to adjust for that is to actually make these overlap. So I'm going to go over to this file. This is why you want to save the SVG file. This one is the PES file. It's kind of hard to adjust it. So I'm going to go back to the SVG file so I can make my adjustments. So I'll zoom in here a little bit so we can see better. So now we've got this element. I want to make it bigger. So I'm going to go to Extensions, Inkstitch, Params. It's going to show me the preview. Now, the easiest way to make this bigger is over here in the options. It's got expand, and I can type in an amount, and it'll just make that bigger. And you can see here for the underlay, that's the original shape. And then the upper layer here, you can see it's overhanging that by 1 millimeter on each side. So I'm going to apply that, then select. Holding on the Shift key, I can select both of those. And then if I go to Params, there we go. Now you can see that the yellow and the blue are overlapping. So that'll keep it from showing a gap when we actually embroider it. And how much of an overlap you need depends on things like the type of fabric you're using mainly, and several other settings like the quality of the thread. The fabric's kind of the big one. So you always want to test your design on the fabric that you're going to be using it before you make like a bunch of them, to make sure that you've compensated correctly for like this push-pull effect. So and then when you've got satin stitches like this, you can also expand those. If we go to Params again, pull compensation. So that's what that is. So we'll let that go through its preview. So if I change that, now you can see that this got thicker because I expanded it. And I can apply that. So now I'm going to select this whole thing and go to Params again. So we can see that difference. I expanded this circle satin stitch, but not the outside. There we go. So now you can see that that one is a whole lot bigger than that one. So both of these things will help hide any gaps you might have. Adding a satin stitch as an outline, expanding the areas of any of your elements so that they overlap each other. All right. Another thing you can do to make your design come out, to make it easier to sew your design, is to sort the layers. Okay, so we can see over here where I've got layers, each little element in here is its own layer. And if you rearrange them, that'll affect the order that it actually stitches them. So if I put this, if I just click and drag, this is on top. So now it's going to show it, stitch it the way it shows on here. It's going to do all the blue, then all the black, and then the yellow on top, which is not exactly what we want here. If you have multiple elements that are different colors, you're going to want them like up against each other. So if, for example, I put it like this, it would stitch the yellow, the black outline, the blue, and then this black outline. Sometimes like this, it's very visible. Sometimes it's not so visible. So say you have a bunch of different flowers and a bunch of different leaves, and they're all not overlapping each other. You probably want to have all the green elements have the layers next to each other, because then the sewing machine won't tell you to change colors too many extra times. So if I've got, let's pick a green, not that. Green, make a leaf, leaf, leaf. If I put this here, there, then it would sew this, tell me to change the color. So it can sew this and this, then tell me to change the color to do this. So it's just most expedient if you have all of the same color together, so that you don't have to change the color so much. You can also group elements together. So if I hold down the Shift key and click on these, okay, hold down the Control key and click on these. Then I can right click and group. Now these are all grouped together in little folders, so I can move them all together at once instead of having to move each layer separately. And I can kind of shrink that folder so I don't have to see every element in it. And if I don't want to see it at all, I can turn on that or turn off that eye icon. So that's how to like design your file and then arrange it so that it'll come out as best as possible. So there's a couple different ways to preview your file, so you'll see how it's going to look. So I showed you how you can do that in, let's see, in params, but you can also, there's a simulator here. So let's visualize and export. Simulator realistic preview. Let's try that preview with the whole thing. If you don't have anything selected, it'll do the whole, whatever's on this design here. So let's go Inkstitch, visualize and export, simulator. Okay, you see it's going to do the yellow, then the blue, then the black. I'll speed this up so it doesn't take quite so long. All right, so that's how it's going to look step by step. Now, if we go down here, we have a couple options. We can have it tell us exactly where all the little needle, where the needle is going to go in the fabric. We can toggle on this realistic, so we're going to see exactly how it looks when it's on fabric, or a close approximation. Okay, so this is pretty close to how it's going to look when it's actually on fabric. So I'm going to close that for now. And another option we've got to preview it, visualize and export, is PDF export. So this is useful if you're making custom embroidery files as a business, like you want to sell them to people. Here we go. So there's a preview of the image, and you can also turn that realistic. There we go. So a realistic preview of your image, and then preview of the image itself, all the different parts of it, the colors you're going to need, the stitches for each, the estimated time it's going to take. So this is handy if you're making a business and you want to sell your embroidery files. You can like enter a job title, put your client, and all that useful stuff. So I'm going to close that. So that is the basics of how to use Inkstitch. So I'm going to go back to As I mentioned before, they have a lot more information here with more like options of things you can do. So I haven't even gone over to some of the fancier stitches, like they've got ripple stitches. And all right, so place and jump stitches. I'm going to share my screen again so I can show you that. Let's click on this, extensions, Inkstitch, commands, attach commands to selected objects. Here we go. Trim thread after showing this object. There we go. So now it'll cut that and we won't have that gap there. Thank you for coming, everyone. We hope to see you in the library soon, and we hope you have fun with Inkstitch. Bye, everyone.